But there's something about marriage that truly humbles you. If you allow yourself to be humbled.
Someone listening to this may start to worry, am I prepared for marriage? I've done my research.
And they should be worried. I honestly think they should be worried. When the music stops and everyone goes back to their homes and you get into your home with your husband, you realize how you have no clue what those things are really about.
Hello, how are you doing?
Great, love. How are you?
I'm good.
You notice I'm trying not to sound as deep as you sound, eh?
Do I sound deep?
Yes, you do. I don't mean deep, like when you speak. I mean deep. The decibels in your voice.
Pun not intended.
See your life, see your life, see your life.
How are you today?
I'm good today. Today's been a restful day.
Yeah.
Stayed in today, which I think was good. The last couple of days have been a bit hectic on our feet from morning till evening. Very productive. I like today because we got a chance to just stay in and connect and have some very come to Jesus conversations. Not very comfortable, but very necessary, especially now as we make 1 year, as husband and helper.
Husband and helper.
Husband and wife. As husband and wife. I think it was good to just sort of shut out the noise.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to go through life and never taking a moment to catch your breath and think about the things that really matter, but also take stock of the time that's gone by. And a lot of things happen over days and weeks and months and even a year. And because some of them have not necessarily been explicitly dealt with, you just keep glossing over them. But they come back to some of the most valuable conversations are not very comfortable. If something is comfortable all the time, then you might want to question whether it's being very effective. The conversations that, at least in my experience, the conversations with you particularly, in my experience, that have sort of stretched me and made me question a couple of things about myself, but also helped me begin to grow, have been the most uncomfortable conversations. They are conversations that have led to tears. Tears, but also right after the tears is a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah.
But also asking myself deep fundamental questions. They have gotten me to a place of checking some of the perspectives that I have held so dearly. But also they've helped peel back the layers of, I think they're called strongholds.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I've embodied for a long time. 20 years plus is not a short time. It's a lot of time. And that's the time as an adult, an understanding adult. So, and I think one of the things I've come to appreciate in the last 1 year of our marriage is that marriage opens your eyes to, it's easy to go through the first year of your marriage trying to nitpick the shortcomings of your partner. But one of the things that I've come to appreciate in the last 1 year of our marriage is that it actually has opened my eyes out to my imperfections, but in a good way. Many times when we think about our imperfections, it's from a self-condemnation perspective.
Yeah.
But there's something about marriage that truly humbles you. If you allow yourself to be humbled. It humbles you, but that humility is the beginning of something beautiful.
Amazing.
It refines you. That's been my experience. I think you must have a different experience from mine. You're a guy after all, and not just any guy, but your feelings. I'm keen on hearing what your experience has been like.
So it's just because I hadn't thought about it.
Really?
I think marriage is one of the hardest things about life is the things we are familiar with, and we can easily mistake familiarity for knowledge.
It's an interesting one.
So a lot of times we approach marriage as, like, marriage is not something you think of like rocket science. And that's where I think most people fail at it or struggle at it, because they come into the arena already underestimating it. Thinking,
with presumptions that they know what they're getting into?
Because they know of it. They've seen a father married. They've seen an uncle married.
Okay.
They've seen a friend married. So it seems to be something everyone knows about. Secondly, I remember someone once said that marriage is like, when you go to the banking halls and you have those tinted glasses where people inside see what's outside, and people outside can't see what's inside. The nature of marriage is such that it's a private affair. The insiders are abstracted, the outsiders are abstracted from what's going on in the inside. But also the people who are inside their unique marriages cannot see what in other people's marriages. There is something called a prisoner's dilemma. I don't know if I remember it correctly. But there was a concept where they put two inmates into different rooms. And I think each one was told that the other one had flipped on them. And they were, I think, trying to influence them to flip. So there seems to be a reality. If different couples are in different places and have no exposure to anyone else, it's easier to think that what's going on in their marriage is a unique reality. So sometimes people spend a lot of time passing blame to who, instead of understanding this thing called marriage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So basically, what you're saying is, let me make sure I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
What's going on in a marriage, what's been going on in our marriage for the last 1 year is not necessarily what's going on in someone else's marriage.
Not necessarily. Very likely it's the same thing going on.
Oh, okay. So it's very likely that it's not unique to us. Our experience is unique to us because we're the ones who are experiencing it. And as human beings, we experience things differently. But it's not new. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, but the dilemma of it is the fact that we think it's new. Because when you think it's new, you don't look for the tried and tested ways of dealing with challenges. You resort to passing blame to someone else or finding everything that can use to explain what's going on.
Outside of yourself as an individual.
Yes.
But isn't that like not far removed from what I shared when I said that marriage has a way of showing you who you really are to yourself? If you look at the experiences that you're going through as a couple, and you reflect on them as an individual, what have I contributed to this situation, whether it's a negative or positive situation, then I am more prone to realizing my shortcomings. But if I'm constantly thinking that Felix is the problem, Felix is complicated, Felix is difficult to please, and you're probably thinking Rukh-Shana is so impatient, Rukh-Shana doesn't listen, Rukh-Shana, then it becomes very difficult for you to even recognize how you have, what you need to change or deal with about you, because then I'm the problem or you're the problem.
Now, I realize there are two things we need to separate. We need to separate marriage as a thing in itself, just as you can think of a human being. Then we need to separate our marriage, which is like how you can have Rukh-Shana. She's a human being, but she's also Rukh-Shana. That Felix is a human being, but he's also Felix. You see that distinction?
He's first and foremost a human being before he becomes Felix.
Exactly.
So there's Felix, the human being, the man, and then there's Felix, the person who is a sum total of everything that's happened to him and his culture and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay.
So now, and that's where the same thing may happen. Now, when you get into marriage, when you take that idea of personality, you have a man, a human being, who is a man.
First and foremost.
And then who is your husband. And then who is themselves.
Okay, it's quite a lot to do with.
The idea therein is a lot of times we see things as one. And that's where the struggle is. If you cannot put something in its rightful context, then you may struggle with comprehending it. Does that make sense? So
yeah, I think I begin to hear you.
Most people, and that's what I talked about, that when I challenge with marriage, it's familiar. And people mistake its familiarity for being knowledgeable of it. Now, the place of knowledge is the one that says, wait, I need to educate myself about marriage.
In general. Okay.
Now, unfortunately, most people, the way they go about knowledge in marriage is that challenges in marriage push them in seeking solutions, hence their education. But they do not go as students trying to learn about this thing called marriage.
But have you considered why? It's kind of difficult for me to position myself as a student trying to educate myself on this thing called marriage when I have an immediate problem that needs to be resolved. So I'm thinking short term. Short term is I have a challenge, I need to fix it.
And that's what I said. So now it's interesting. It's that familiarity to marriage that before people enter marriage, instead of preparing themselves, they assume, I know it, I just go and get started. Imagine you're playing soccer as a child and maybe you've been on the bench and you're saying, give me a sport, I want to play. But in that moment, you're not thinking about whether you're prepared to play. All the desire in you is to get on the pitch and start playing.
Let me ask you a question, love. Yeah. Before you got married, which is 1 year ago, do you feel like you... And I'm not putting you on the spot here.
No,
I mean, I'm if you ask me the same question, I would respond.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you took the time to educate yourself about marriage?
Ironically, a friend of mine called Dennis. Before we got married, I was talking to him and sharing my insights. And I called a bunch of people getting their views on marriage. I called up friends married and divorced and looking for insights from each of them. And he confided in me and said, I don't think I've ever seen anyone invest this much time in preparation to their marriage. I was taken aback, but I realized also the way I approach everything in life.
You're a seeker of knowledge,
yes.
Naturally.
Yes.
It's your natural disposition.
And I also don't like failure, so I like to prepare. And at the back of my mind, I believe everything is possible. That if I fail, there is no legitimate reason for me to fail. That's why if there's any failure, I ask why. There has to be a why. Because failure is not it's not legitimate. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Clearly, you were a lot more prepared for marriage than I was, which is ironic because I think it goes back to what you said about people mistaking what they know about marriage for knowledge.
Mistaking what they've
seen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So because we've been surrounded, by the time we got married a year ago, I think don't know how many of my peers were still single because they've been married a long time. Some had been married, divorced, into their second marriages. And of course, we swap stories, especially women. I don't know about men, but women talk a lot. So we swap stories. You get to hear a lot of things about marriage and stuff. So you almost feel like your friends' experiences become your own because you walk this journey with them in the sense that you're always talking about stuff. So this stuff becomes so real. It gets stored somewhere in some part of your brain. And it's like, okay, I know this. If he acts like this, it's probably this and blah, 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 blah. But I remember there was a point during our counseling session where for a moment I realized that, okay, let me take a step back. There comes a point in a woman's life where if you've been through a couple of relationships and you've read a couple of things and you've experienced marriage through your friends' experiences and you think you know quite a lot, you think you're ready. But there was a distinct point in the preparation to us becoming man and wife where I almost questioned my being ready for marriage. It was scary. It was a very, very scary thought because I thought, who clocks 40 and is not ready for marriage? You get. But I realized in one of those counseling sessions, I was like, I actually don't think I'm ready for marriage. And in that moment, I remember thinking to myself, you need to think about what you need to do to get ready for marriage. But also, marriage is it's not like getting ready for university or for school or something like that. There are certain basics that have to be there. And for me, I felt like I had the basics, and that's where my confidence came. I had the basics. It wasn't about me and my ability to be a homemaker, because guess what? I've never had an opportunity to actually be a homemaker. Yeah. So I wasn't even sure I could really be a homemaker. It was really about, do I understand what marriage is about? Okay, do I know? Let me start by knowledge, because understanding is like a different level. Do I know what marriage is really about? Is it just about walking down the aisle, having a beautiful wedding, living as man and wife? But do you understand the purpose of marriage from God's perspective? What did God intend marriage for? That's the first thing. But also, do you understand? Do you have fair knowledge of the man you're going to get married to? And these are things that started dawning on me during the counseling session. Have you appreciated this? Because when you get married, he's not going to be the guy who would sing songs to you and you dance and get you flowers every day and stuff. And it's very different. He's very different from you, and he's lived life a certain way, and he has expectations and stuff. And you must appreciate that. Just because you've been friends, even though it was for a short while, when you get married, it's totally different. And I think this is something that possibly people don't say enough. Because coming into marriage, my expectation is we're friends. We talk all the time, because we used to talk all the time. Yeah. You know what I love. I know what you love. That's how it's going to be. We're going to be partners, and then you get into marriage and you realize, nothing. God's design of marriage is not a partnership arrangement. It's not about equality. It's leadership. It's servant leadership and submission. And these are concepts that I had heard about them. But the truth is, when the music stops and everyone goes back to their homes and you get into your home with your husband, you realize how you have no clue what those things are really about.
But there's something that comes up as I hear you speak of, because someone listening to this may start to worry, am I prepared for marriage? I've done my research.
And they should be worried. I honestly think they should be worried. When you're too comfortable, I think there's a problem. But that's me.
There's another perspective.
Let me hear you. Let me hear your perspective.
Mike Tyson once said, you always have a plan until you get punched in the face. And I think the seeking of knowledge is known that you'll get all knowledge. And it's the same thing about your partner. You never know everything about your partner. Mm-hmm. You can never be fully educated. And therein lies the nature of life. If you ask me, I feel trying to understand marriage should be a journey that begins before marriage and even in marriage. And what's also I found ironic is that most times people don't know that marriage begins before you're married.
Or before you even meet the person.
Before you even meet the person. Because if you thought of your life cycle to marriage, everything is working together to lead you to a place. The person you are becoming, you get? The things you choose to prioritize, like everything is working together. So marriage is what we call marriage is a phase in time. But it's just a phase in time. It's two parties walking different paths and aligning at a certain phase, and they walk that path together. So marriage is not a new world you enter into. You don't become a new person. You come with what you've been working on. Right?
It just actually, it accentuates. It shows you who you really, it reveals you to you.
And that's where it gets interesting. I remember before I got married, I had a friend of mine who said, people in their proper, who are in a good state of mind, are able to meet one day and get married the next week and pull it off. And what I liked with that point of view, and where I may agree with it to a certain extent, I feel marriage is not about the other person. It's about me. Jesus advocated for these theories. He said, when someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other. But the natural human response is not to turn the other cheek. The natural human response is to hit them back, right? And that's where, if no one took the teachings of Jesus to heart, then you realize two people are going to end up hating each other. When you study Christianity, and this is where it's fascinating, we're talking about people learning about marriage, but I feel people need to learn about all things that pertain to them. As we learn of marriage, we need to learn of Christianity. What is this thing we are part of, right? You hear of the fruit of the Spirit. What is this fruit of the Spirit? There was a time in my life where I went each of the, I'm careful to call it each of the fruit because the Bible calls it a fruit of the Spirit, not fruits of the Spirit. So I don't know, does it become a seed or what? But each of them, I would go through individually and assess myself. I assess myself, how am I in humility? There's a time in my life where I deliberated on humility and how I relate with people, and much more so how I relate with people who may be in a lesser position that I may be in. But I learned to test myself on each of those pieces to see how I come off. Now, my view about marriage, if someone asks me, is if people try to be the best human beings they can be. But that has a caveat. You can't say best human being generically because there has to be a standard by which you measure best. And a way to that, if we embodied the fruit of the Spirit, then we'll pull it off. I remember before getting married, I talked to my mom and dad. I never forget having breakfast at home. And I was talking to them and I said, what advice can you give me about marriage? And they all, I think, focused on two things. It was patience and forgiveness. And it's quite ironic. If someone was telling you the deep mysteries of marriage, you wouldn't think it's something like patience and forgiveness. But when you think about patience as well, it's still just like marriage. It's a familiar word. But until your patience has been tested. and then it has to show, right? So I feel, honestly, if you ask me what does it take for a great marriage, I think it takes people who embody the Spirit of Christ. Now, that place is not it's not something you suddenly end up in. It's something you grow into.
Yeah.
Daily, working towards it.
I totally agree with you. Especially if I'm to take stock of the last 1 year.
Yeah.
When you talk about being Christ-like or embodying being Christ-like, I feel like marriage, it's beautiful. It's such a beautiful thing. But just like many beautiful things, it does come with its challenges. It comes with its challenges, but also because you're trying to adjust. You're trying to adapt, not adjust, trying to adapt to living with another person who comes from a different background, even when backgrounds are the same. I mean, think about it. You have siblings, right? I have siblings. Born, same mom, same dad, DNA is exactly the same, but no two people are similar. Even siblings are not similar. Raised in the same household, embody different values, interestingly, despite the fact that we're raised in the same household. And it's difficult sometimes to get along with our own siblings. How much more complex is it going to be to get along with your partner? I see you want to say something, but hold that thought. So it's very easy. I find that sometimes it's easy to assume that because we're both Christians, which is good, because I totally believe that it makes sense, or at least it should be a little bit easier if you're both Christians, and it's the right thing. But there is still a place of being unequally yoked, even as Christians. I'm born again, you're born again, doesn't automatically mean that we're going to be at the same level, right? And sometimes that yoking can be a bit uncomfortable and a bit complex. And that's where the wisdom of Christ comes in. That's where the forbearance comes in. That's where the patience, that's where the love comes in. That's where all these things. Otherwise, it is very easy to take what was such a beautiful gift that was given to someone and just say, you know what, I'm done. I am actually done with it. Because it can become heavy. You're trying to adjust to a new kind of life in every sense of the word. And you're dealing with your own ghosts, for lack of a better word, and your own challenges. And then there's the you together. And then there's other issues that come with the institution. Like I talked about submission. And it's very easy to assume that we know what submission is.
Yeah.
Ah, man, I thought I knew what submission was. I thought I was, let's just say I'm still trying to get.
You raise
trying to get a hang of it.
You raise a very interesting point about submission, and it is something that has become popular, best in church circles. Growing up in a Roman Catholic church as a child, I don't remember ever interfacing with submission. But growing up, of course, I've been born again for a number of years. But I remember as an adult, I started getting exposed to certain doctrines, and I had submission more and more. And when you go culturally, you find the very element of submission that you find in the Bible. But they all come at it from different points of view. Mm-hmm. And therein I find the struggle. Are people trying to submit for submission's sake? Or have people found value in submission that they've pursued?
And that's the big question. But how do you find value in something you do not understand?
I'll take a check at our education system in Uganda as a starting point. the fact that it doesn't nurture the seeking of knowledge and a search for understanding. Our curriculums, we were taught about what do they call the preludes?
Yes, the Canadian
Canadian preludes. I don't know what that's about. I'm sure I failed. I could only try to imagine what they were talking about. I didn't understand it. And in such an education system where people are taught things and have to memorize and pass them, it's in that scenario when people are told of submission, they may look at it as another test I have to pass. There's this thing called submission. I have to get it and pass it. But did you understand it? Right? And therefore, one is going to struggle. If you do something without the understanding of it, you'll struggle. Right? Why it's so tricky, when you find submission, the Bible doesn't have many verses that go on and on about submission. They're not plentiful. And because of that, it leaves a lot of room for teachers with enlightenment and revelation to expound such a principle to the comprehension of many, which oftentimes doesn't happen, right? And people may find themselves, I see you're itching to share something.
No, it's just that even listening to you, I can sort of feel an internal struggle.
Yeah.
You know, there are topics and conversations that even in the confines of the church, or when I say church, I don't mean like the physical building. Yeah. When people start to talk about them, you start feeling uncomfortable on the inside. Yeah. And I feel like submission is one of those things. Yeah. And it's most likely because the moment, they're like triggers. There are certain things that when they get said, everything inside of you starts fighting. You're actually ready. You're ready to just come at it. And I feel like submission is one of those things. Yeah. Not so much love, which is what is expected of the husband, to love his wife as Christ loved the church. Submission is something else. And I think it's because of the times in which we exist. We have been exposed. I use the word exposed very loosely. We've been exposed to a lot, and our perspectives to life and our culture in some shape or form has morphed into things that we cannot even quite define. So even at a very subconscious level, I feel like sometimes when the subject of submission starts, and this is not just even submission in the context of marriage, it's even submission in the context of leadership. In the church, the moment you hear submission, it's like something just goes off in your head and you just start resisting. So it's almost like there is a need, like you rightly put it, to sort of understand submission in the context in which God meant for it to be, because I feel like it's sort of been abused, especially, I don't want to go into the whole emancipation conversation and things like that, but the truth is we exist in a time and space where a lot of what we believe and a lot of the values that we espouse have been so influenced by things we do not understand. But guess what? It is deeply ingrained in us. So it takes a lot to actually peel back all those things. Not even peel back. It takes a lot to actually reset. It almost takes a miracle to reset. It takes an encounter to reset. And I feel that you are actually, as a young married woman or a young couple, you are actually blessed if you start dealing with these things as early as possible in your marriage, because it gets harder as you go along. In fact, your marriage may not even survive. It actually may not survive.
But see, I hear something, and I think where the teaching on submission gets wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the times when you hear the word submission used, it's followed up by a woman. So we sort of contextualized submission to be a woman thing. Now, submission is in every place where headship exists.
True.
It's in every place where lordship exists. Now, a lot of people say, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. But I don't know if a lot of people take the time to ponder on what
that really
means. The acceptance of a Lord. And the unfortunate part, most of it is in English. When you hear the word Lord, we know of the House of Lords in Britain, but there's no House of Lords in Kampala. So which means someone in Kampala cannot conceptualize lordship. But if you go and ask someone in Britain where they can conceptualize lordship, they probably can, right? Now, what does it mean for one to accept the lordship of Christ? When you accept the lordship of Christ, it means you're submitting to Christ. Now, that is also easier said than understood.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Paul in the Bible says, it's no longer I that lives, but Christ who lives in me. That is a man who has understood submission. He gives up his own will for the will of his Lord. But you ask, who required Paul to submit?
Was it not the natural order of things?
Yeah, but what happens if you don't? Other people weren't submitted. Not everyone would claim that it's no longer I that lives. A man had surrendered his entire will to Christ. So he wasn't doing it because someone told him, you have to. He did it because he had a revelation of it. And he pursued it with his all, gladly surrendered his will. Now, that's the difference between one who has revelation and one who has instruction. There are people who have the instruction to submit, but they don't have the revelation of submission.
I totally agree. I think in another dimension, it would be referred to as, and I think earlier on I had the thought, but I never shared it. There's experiential knowledge. That's something no one can take away from you. It's not just something you read or you've heard about, but there's conviction, and nothing trounces conviction.
There's another dilemma. How do people come to revelation?
Seeking knowledge.
You see, revelation is not knowledge.
But can you get revelation without knowledge?
Yes. Because the revelation is from the Spirit.
Okay.
Right? The Spirit is able to reveal things to you that you've never even read, but you have an understanding of it. If you ask me what I've shared about submission, where do I get it from? Did I read a book? So the Spirit is able to reveal things to us. Now, how do you get to the point of intimacy with the Spirit that you may get such revelations? Now, this is where it gets complex. You need to submit to the Spirit.
So, egg, chicken, egg. Which comes first?
You get?
This sounds like a conversation for an entirely, totally different 1-2 hours of, another conversation podcast.
But that's very important. And this is where I tell you the dynamics of marriage. This is where marriage is something familiar, but people don't know and don't understand. And you can look at marriage in different angles. You can look at it in terms of the spiritual dimension to it. What I find interesting about marriage is the biological side of it.
How so?
There is this TED Talk I was listening to. I shared it with you. Of the gentleman who was talking about why men, when they've been
married for a while,
when a man is seeing something new, dopamine, the hormone dopamine, increases. And as dopamine increases, it leads to an increase in testosterone. Right? Now, what happens in marriage, you no longer have dopamine.
Because the newness fades very quickly and there's nothing.
It becomes the normal. Now, what carries you in the absence of dopamine? And that's what I find fascinating also, that when the church, a lot of times when people are trying to navigate, understand their marriages, most of them either incline the spiritual side of things, others incline the psychological side of things, but sometimes many of us don't think about the biological side of things. And that's a topic of great interest to me. And I find a parallels between the biology and the spirituality. In Galatians 5:17, Paul says, there's a root of sinful self-interest in us that is antithetical to the free spirit. Now, it speaks about the battle between the spirit and the flesh. Now, it's now I understood the flesh in a more tangible way. The hormones within us, they are independent of us. You don't tell your hormones to start flowing. They flow.
Yeah, they got a life of their own.
They've been conditioned over years of evolution to respond a certain way. Now, some people are slaves to the flesh. But amidst it all, there's a place where a man can rule his flesh. And that's the place of spiritual maturity, where a man has power over his flesh. He's not driven by the hormones. Now, where marriage gets interesting, which goes back to something hinted on about being unequally yoked. What happens when people are not at the same levels of maturity? What happens when one hasn't yet overcome their flesh and the other, or maybe the level of which overcoming is a bit different from the others? How do you reconcile those pieces? Now, that's where the understanding of the biology helps, because it extends empathy. You're more empathetic when you understand that this person is not just a bad human being. They are a victim of evolutionary effects. By evolution, they've evolved to respond a certain way to certain things. Now, patience comes in handy there and then to allow people on their journey to overcome the flesh. Did I lose you?
No, you didn't. I'm just running around in my head trying to think, at which point in our marriage was this being played out?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. You know how I be. So I'm there thinking, okay, so now I see how he's managed to make it through the one last one.
In all fairness, the knowledge, the consciousness about biology and hormones is a fresh awareness, and goes back to what we talked about. We're constantly seeking to understand this thing called marriage. Let me go back to my father's house. In my father's house, I'm a son. But my mother came into that home. That home is not one with her. She left her father and mother to come in that home. And yet for me as a son, that home is the only home. I'm trying to paint a picture of what a home is. That a home is a different thing to the child than it is to the parents. The parents can walk away from it because they all left their father and mother. They have a place they came from.
That they can go to if they decide.
They can go
technically.
to. But for the child, that home
is all they have. It's all they know.
So the union of a marriage, no one embodies it better than the child. And that's why divorce is more costly to the child, because it's the child who loses that oneness, because that oneness is what produced them.
Interesting.
They're a product of a oneness. Absent of oneness,
They're lost.
they've lost something so dear to them. And when you have such knowledge and you have a character enough to care about the children in a marriage, you're more determined to preserve. And that's why it's fascinating. The home to a child is permanent. A child can't divorce their home, but that home is a product of a marriage. But the adults who created this, who got into this marriage, can divorce it. Now, it takes a lot of willingness to sacrifice for them to not lose it. But the child can't lose it. Do you see the dilemma? So, the adults have to be selfless for the children to have this thing. It's like the tooth fairy. The idea of a tooth fairy is like this fantasy. But to the child in that fantasy of a tooth fairy, it is reality. And for them, they're in that world of a tooth fairy. They get their tooth and expecting the fairy to give them some money, right? And the adults are aware of it, but they preserve it. Now, it's the same way that marriage is. That a marriage produces this home, that produces these children. And for the child, this thing that adults can easily break apart, they see as permanent. And it's up to the adults to hold this thing for these children. It's quite deep. I hadn't thought about it before either.
Yeah, it is. It is deep. That's all I can say. I think I've never really thought about. I know how painful. I can imagine how painful it is for the children, but I've never really had to think of it in the way that you've described it. The most I've done is think about the fact that this child didn't ask to be brought into this world.
Yeah.
They didn't choose, You chose me. I chose to say yes. We walked into this thing very sober. We didn't meet in a pub. We were not high. We didn't fly off to Vegas and get married and we were drunk. We chose to get married. We may not have had I may not have had the full understanding of what this would require of me. I might have had a little understanding. And then we have kids. They didn't choose to be brought into this world. They were a product of a union that we walked into very sober, hopefully understanding that it would require everything of us. It would require us to lay ourselves aside, literally, and sacrifice ourselves for the greater good, the greater purpose of God, which is really what I believe marriage is really about. And so they come into this world. Of course, God has a plan and a purpose for them, which is beautiful. We may not understand it or know it, but because we know who God is and the nature of God, and He has a great plan for their lives, and then all of a sudden we're making decisions that will affect their lives in some shape or form. And I think for me, the sad part about divorce, one of the sad things about divorce, even, of course, the most important thing is the spiritual aspect, because you made vows, you made a vow. We said our vows, but we made these vows before God. And my keeping my vows has nothing to do with how you have behaved. I made a vow, and we serve a God who understands what covenants really mean. And I cannot go to God and say, but the man that you sent me to hell I'm thinking, God is thinking, no, you made a vow. It has nothing to do with how your husband has behaved or what your husband has done. Have you kept your vows? And that is the nature of the covenant God that we serve. And for me, that is a very scary thought, but it's also very empowering. It's sobering, actually. I think the right word is sobering. It's a very, very sobering thought. So when people talk about irreconcilable differences, my heart breaks. And I remember sharing with one of my friends not so long ago. Before I got married, I'd love going for church weddings. I would easily skip the reception, but I loved the services because obviously I love the worship. But I remember every time I would attend a church service, and it only came to me much later, as they were exchanging the vows, I would weep, literally weep. And I didn't understand. I think the canon me thought I was weeping because I wish that were me. Maybe one day it shall be me. But in hindsight, I actually, when I go to that place of asking myself, why do I cry when people are saying the beautiful things that they're saying? There was a part of me that knew or that felt like people were swearing things that they would so easily break and didn't understand the ramifications of it. And that's what would make me cry. And I honestly thought that that saying my vows, I would cry. So I was shocked when I didn't cry. I was like, where did all the tears go? I'm such a cry baby. But I think it's because in that moment, by God's grace, I knew that what I was walking into, out is not an option. No matter the circumstances, out is not an option. Not because of what my family will say, not because of what society will say, but because I made a vow to God, before God, with God, that till death do us part. Now, I could get shot in the head for saying, but you don't understand. What if the relationship is abusive? And I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole because it shall open up a whole host of things. But I'd just like to double back to what you raised around children. I think there's a place where we ought to think about these children and how divorce affects them. And I have found that sometimes it's very easy, maybe not very easy. I think sometimes as the husband or the ex-husband and the ex-wife are trying to heal through it, sometimes it's very easy to forget that these children are also going through their own Shiva. And they probably need a lot more help because they never had a say in this matter. They never had a say in coming into the world. They never had a say in being born between these two parents. They never had a say in the divorce. No one really asks the kids. Okay? We see it in the movies. I don't know if it happens in real life. That, oh, by the way, so we're breaking up and how do you feel about this? No. We sort of assume that the kids will get with the program. We actually assume that the kids will adapt to the whole co-parenting agenda. But it's a sad thing. It's a very sad thing. I think divorce, the Bible talks about God hating divorce. And I can sort of understand, I think, in some shape or form, why God would sort of hate divorce. And let's just say it's not a comfortable conversation. Certainly not 1 year in.
and I think we need to pull it back a bit so people don't. In all fairness, most people have
valid reasons.
Valid reasons.
Valid reasons to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, even there could be valid reasons. If they came and explain, that's why they go to courts and they can accept their divorces because it's a valid reason. But you brought out something, a good word. I had the spirit of it, but I didn't have the word for it. The vow. I don't know which local musician who did a song and says, Sija kuva Kampala ngani. And for me, I feel that embodies a vow. a man says, Sija kuva Kampala ngani. Now that vow doesn't mean that Kampala is going to be easy for that man. It just means the man has made a vow to not leave the city. I remember one time there's a word that I said that I'll run. If I can't run, I'll walk. If I can't walk, I'll crawl.
Cool.
But it's the determination of one who's intent on going to the finish line. And while you speak about God hating divorce, and one of the things that pulls me up there on marriage, and the very fact that at the point of its conception is there's a vow, and a vow is words. Words. That's the power of the word. Now, in a high trust society of people, your word carries a lot of weight. To go against your word affects your credibility, because if you say something and do otherwise, that makes you incongruent with your word. And I think if there's any other reason for someone to hold into marriage, would be that they may stand behind their word, that they may lend credence to their word. But in all fairness, I think people who get divorced are not any less than other people. Perhaps the burden they had to carry was heavier than other people, because people are not going through the same experiences. Marriages may be challenging to everyone in them, but they don't carry the same level of challenges. So some people probably are weighed down heavily. And also some people may find a way to reconcile with their maker. But I believe at the end of it all, it's not a good thing for all the people involved.
Yeah.
Because you can make the assumption even the people who have divorced are going to live happily ever after.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not easy at all, even for them. The scars that they carry.
Marriage divorce is a dark subject, considering
I just feel,
our anniversary is around the corner.
I just feel such a heaviness. It's 2 days away.
So we shall leave that.
But I like that we're talking about this now, because I feel like there's a lot that doesn't really get talked about because it's uncomfortable. But it's in the uncomfortable conversations that even the uncomfortable conversations need to be had at a certain point. And if our marriage is anything to go by, I sort of feel like the sooner you have the uncomfortable conversations, the better. Exactly. Because then you have an opportunity to start thinking about certain things. But also it gives me a chance to hear your thoughts. Because, it's very easy to assume that you're on the same page.
Yeah.
You get... I think there's someone who said, I don't know if it's actually a Luganda saying, but but when you begin to have conversations about certain things, then you also you can check yourself. You can check yourself and self-correct before you get to a point where things are. But that said, it's been an exciting 1 year.
Indeed.
It's gone by so fast. Just the other day, we were putting together a Trello board. It's the first time I ever heard of Trello, and collaboration, digital collaboration, and trying to get a wedding planned. The difference between June, which is when you proposed. You proposed in June, right?
Why are you putting me on the spot?
The time lag between June and November. June, July, August, September, October, November, 6. Magic number 6. 6 months. I don't know if I ever told you this. I always thought or knew or believed or hoped that I would have like a whole year to plan my wedding. A whole year to think about what I was going to wear and get fit and ready for it and get onto a diet and, work on my skin and, the flimsy things we focus on when we're planning to get married that really don't matter. When you're wearing the ring, okay, they do matter. I honestly thought I'd need like a whole year to plan my wedding. And I suppose it's also because then I was focusing on the wedding as opposed to the marriage, which is what a lot of us people do. So when it dawned on me that we had 6 months to plan the wedding, I don't think I have had that many knots in my tummy momentarily. And I use the word momentarily because very quickly in that moment, as I started to think about what it was that we were working towards, but more importantly, why and who was behind it, that was when I sort of got the comfort. Don't try to be in control. You've gone through over 20 years of your life, adult life. 20. That's slightly more than 20. Trying to be in control of everything. But this is the one thing that's not about you. Or at least it's not the one thing, but it's the one thing you have to accept is really not about you. So stop trying to control everything. Stop trying to think about where the finances are going to come from because you're going to get stressed. Stop trying to think about how perfect things are going to be because this is not about you. Stop trying to think about one day and obsessing over one day when you have your lifetime post the day to think about. Stop trying to worry about how your 10-year-old, then 9-year-old is sort of going to gel with your husband. Stop for a moment. Just stop. Just stop. And let me take control. Do you have any idea how difficult that was for a control freak like me? It was hard. But even in the moments where I felt like I was trying to take back the reins, I kept hearing the reassurance that this is not about you. Let go and let me show you what I can do when you choose to not make it about you, when you choose to trust me, when you choose to just believe. Just be. And it was so beautiful. If anyone had told me before that it was possible for two people who met in 2019, just before COVID was in 2020, I think that's when you came to know about it, met, dated briefly, broke it off, that we would be contemplating getting married in 2021, I would have thought they were crazy. I really would have thought they were crazy. But I think it was just that allowing to not necessarily know everything or be in control of everything that made it easier. And I didn't. Here we are. 1 year later.
And I couldn't have thought of a better way to crown off this year of marriage than this podcast on marriage. And in a way, I'm humbled by that testimony of this podcast in itself, because the fact that a year later we can have a conversation and we're not batting heads, that's encouraging. Because it's a sign that there's been growth in the marriage towards oneness and not the other way around. And it also coincides with our Maiden podcast. Yeah. How do you feel about this?
Just like I felt about our marriage. So it's a cocktail. It's a cocktail of emotions. Of course, there's an excitement. Yeah. The excitement of something new, a new phase in our lives in terms of what we'd like to do, and just conversations that hopefully will, change lives in some shape or form, or let people feel like they're not alone. Yeah. A lot of times we are weighed down by life because we think we're experiencing life alone. Yeah. But there are people who have gone ahead of us, have experienced things, are still experiencing things. And when they share their stories or their story, it's encouraging. and so there's that excitement. But I think also for me, the other emotion that I'm feeling is this is like our marriage. It's like one of those many fasts.
Yeah.
I'm not used to having open conversations, that become public. Yeah. Even the few friends that I have will tell you, I generally don't keep more than 5 friends at a go because I can't really multitask. But also, I don't open up that easily to even my friends. So being able to have these conversations that are, just going to go to the whole world. I've been a very private person for a very, very long time, for quite a number of reasons. So for me to be able to have this conversation, for me it's something. And this is the first of very many such conversations that will sort of just put me out there. Even as I say this, I don't know if you can feel that my voice has sort of changed. I feel like knots in my tummy. But I think the confidence I have is that I think the time is right. You can't trounce time. But not just the time being right. I think it's something I'm doing with you. If I had to do this on my own, I don't think I'd be able to do this on my own. I wouldn't be able to carry the weight of it. Even as I speak, it feels so weighty. But I'm just glad that doing life with you over the last 1 year has brought me to a place of more self-awareness. I thought I was generally very self-aware until I got married. And I said, marriage does things to you that you never really expect. So I think my self-awareness has sort of heightened, and it sort of revealed different things to me about me. You've been a leader. You are a leader in very many respects. And it gives me the confidence to sort of move on to a different phase in my life, which is really about letting people see me. The authentic me. The me that's not very confident.
And with that, I say thank you. Thank you for allowing to share yourself with others. And I feel there is an opportunity in helping people have thoughts that they didn't have before. Trying to open up on some of these marriage walls. Perhaps people can find fellowship with another married couple, and perhaps not point fingers at each other as though they're the ones falling short, but to appreciate this is a journey that everyone goes through, has its ups and downs. Yeah. But nothing insurmountable. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you. And you said a lot of good things about me. Or it puts me in a spot having to say something right back at you.
You don't need to say. You can just show me.
But as I
Tiger lilies.
As I said, when I got married, that God didn't give me a chance to love you. He just went cut my heart and place your love inside of it.
Aww.
And I think that has made marriage much easier for me. And I don't say that as a line. It may sound like it's a line, but it's the truth of it in there. When you love someone, it makes it much easier to try to make something work. So thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who joined our conversation.
Yeah.
This is our first of many. And see you later. Bye-bye.
Ciao.